In today's episode of the UNFC podcast, we're going to be looking at the very specific sustainability side of UNFC, or perhaps more appropriately, the E-axis, or environmental-social-economic one.
Joining us today is Dr Rose Clarke, the Sustainability Lead and Director of Operations of Satarla, to talk us through all of the different opportunities and possibilities that we could look to integrate world best practice in sustainability into how we use the UNFC framework. Welcome to the podcast, Rose, and thank you very much for joining us.
Sure, thanks, Chris. I'm a geologist by background, so I kind of started off life spending a lot of time looking at rocks, and transitioned from rocks to rocks and sustainability, I suppose, during my PhD. And so have been very lucky that I've got to spend time on exploration sites, not only looking at the rocks, but also coming at it from a study perspective, from the sustainability perspective. But I've been at Satarla now for 5 years, and in that time have spent a lot of energy and time, I guess, working with a range of clients across the mining and raw materials sector, so not just mining, but the kind of broader space, helping them with their sustainability. And so hopefully it's kind of relevant to the discussion today.
I like to think so, yeah. No, it should really be. So, what are your sort of thoughts on sustainability of a resource management system such as UNFC? And do you really think this sort of E or environmental, social, economic axis is actually sort of really being given equal weighting in this as not only just a sort of extractive resource management system, but also obviously it covers other types of resource management?
Yeah, so I think in terms of I think there's a few strands of conversation here, honestly. I think one of those strands is oftentimes people compare the E in the UNFC to the modifying factors in the Crisco codes. And I understand why people do that, but there are many concerns and challenges with that. One being that the modifying factors did not work really from an environmental or social perspective for a long time. A lot of energy and effort has been spent recently on trying to make them more robust. And that went through very well with PERC. JORC have been struggling with this for a while now, and it's just back from consultation, and it's getting there. But I think broadly speaking, the modifying factors haven't necessarily done the best job, and it's difficult because the system is not very well set up for that. And so you do need a suite of experts who are able to do this. And I think that can be a challenge. I think the other topic of conversation, which is a challenge with this, is that the UNFC is not equitable to mining, nor is it for the same purpose as the Crisco codes. So one, they're aimed at different audiences, and that's its other challenge. But also, the UNFC is not just for mined raw materials. It spans a much broader group. And so oftentimes there can be a conversation around, the mining sector has loads of resources out there. You could use IRMA or the Copper Mark or the consolidated standards that are now being written. And again, they're great, and a lot of time and effort has been spent on those, and they really do have their place within the industry and are definitely driving things in the right direction. But again, oftentimes written just for mining, so not for all the materials including the UNFC, and often written for maturer companies at a certain level along the mining value chain. And so if you're an exploration company, the Copper Mark can be quite difficult. IRMA is now impossible to even look at. And so actually, I think there is still, whilst there's a lot of resources out there, pun intended, that I think people could look at and utilise, I don't think it's very well established as to what good environmental considerations or good social considerations within the context of UNFC could or should look like.
So I don't know, at least to me, this seems to come back to is sustainability sort of being given enough weight or value maybe in sort of the exploration early stages of raw material extraction?
Yeah, and I mean there are companies out there who are exploration companies who do fantastic work on sustainability or ESG or however you want to refer to it. And for the purpose of this, let's just refer to it all as one and ignore the nuance. I think as an industry as a whole, the mining sector has had challenges and maybe hasn't always behaved in the best manner. And I think that during exploration in particular, there are a lot of challenges. These are typically small teams who are trying to get investment and finance to do a huge range of activities. And embedding sustainability at that point can make or break a project, particularly from the social element. But again, it comes back down to training. If your exploration team is predominantly a team of geos, you need to have, just to do the geology component, if we're talking about exploration and mining assets as opposed to broad natural resources. So I am still sticking with mining here, but just to report on the geology, you're expected to have, probably 4 or 5 years of experience at university doing geology. You have to have so many years of experience in the industry in that specific deposit type, just to be able to report on that component. And so to be able to assess, the environmental considerations, the social considerations, I think it's too much to expect a geologist in that situation to be able to effectively assess that as well. And I think a lot of pushback comes on when geologists who work in this space, question, how can we be expected to be experts in all of this? How can we be expected to understand all of this? And at the same time, would it even be appropriate? But then how many experts do you need to be able to do UNFC? And if you need a whole team of people and, to get the best information and do the best assessment, yes, you probably do need a group of people. How much then does that add to the burden of an asset or a site trying to go through this process to prove where they are kind of within that queue? It's difficult because there's an element of, does there need to be more incentivization? Are we expecting too much of people? What is available for people to help them on that journey? Incentivization can be great. Carrot versus stick, it's difficult because we need exploration, we need resources. So it's really, really tricky. And I really feel for exploration companies in particular, because I think they're given a rough deal, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. You and I work closely together with a number of entities in that space, and many of the people we work with are doing absolutely wanting to do the right thing, looking to do the right thing. We touched on Copper Mark and some of those other frameworks and standards aren't really written for that purpose. And I guess that opens the Pandora's box of, there's this e-axis. It's this awesome opportunity to get it in there. Are there any, frameworks from your experience that you look at as could set some of the content for what's on this e-axis? Because there's still just this question mark of what should even be on it. Like, where would you go looking, and what is it out there that you think maybe can be more universally applicable? What matters, essentially?
Yeah, so I think it's a tricky one because of who uses UNFC. So in terms of alignment with the EU is a slight oddity in the world of sustainability reporting globally, because the EU has the CSRD, whereas the rest of the world, and I realise I'm about to throw a load of acronyms, so I'm sure at some point we'll translate. But the EU has CSRD, which is intrinsically different to what a lot of the rest of the world uses, which is ISSB. And so I guess there's two ways that it's probably going to get pulled in. And I would understand it getting pulled in the direction of CSRD. But I think the problem with that would be the right sizing of CSRD for an exploration company, if that is the intent of the UNFC. And I think this is the problem. I think it could do with a better definition of, like, at what stage, who for, what for. Do you know what I mean? And that, I think, is a real kicker in this.
So, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with these acronyms, there is a whole wonderful world or acronym soup of sustainability disclosures and rulings all over the world. And a lot of the world has been on this almost alignment journey through something called the TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosures, which has sort of been taken up and advanced into something called the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, endorsed by the IFRS and all of the wonderful world of accountancy, goodness, and finance that sits under there. And then it's been sort of proliferated around the world with different flavours. So the UK SRS, Sustainability Reporting Standards, under consideration at the moment in the UK. There's a Canadian flavour, Turkish, everywhere. Sort of at odds and ends to that is this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, in the wonderful world of Europe. Rose, do you want to tell us a bit about what is different going in on them, in that particular that granularity of what the request is even in there? Because they are quite opposed.
Yeah, so I think really there's two main differences that I see. I mean, there's hundreds, I'm sure, but there's two big overarching key differences, I think, in terms of the ISSB world and the CSRD world. One is what they deem as material or important, if you like, topics. The rest of the world has gone very much down the financial materiality route. So essentially, if something in the sustainability sphere impacts your bottom line or could impact on the bottom line of your entity, it should get rolled into your ISSB reporting. And that can sound like a negative because it can make it sound very money oriented, but it can actually be a help for people like exploration companies who are having to make financial decisions, because it can help position some of these challenges within the kind of business case sphere, if you like. And so it can be really useful to consider sustainability from that business lens. On the other hand, there is CSRD, and CSRD uses double materiality. So double materiality, as well as being financially driven or financial materiality in the business case, it also looks at your kind of position in the world around you and your impact on the social environment around you and the environmental environment. And so it can be seen as, your impact on the world and the world's impact on you. Now, that's nice in the sense that it's broader, but in order to get that understanding, there is an expectation that a company do a double materiality assessment, which is quite an undertaking. It involves reaching out to a broad range of stakeholders to get that understanding. And so they are intrinsically different ways of looking at materiality and therefore sustainability. So that's one key difference between CSRD and the ISSB. The other is that CSRD is far more prescriptive. There are a lot of rules for CSRD, and that's because the intention is that a CSRD disclosure would be machine readable. And to make it machine readable, you have to jump through certain hoops. Now, it's in the process of getting rolled back. There's the omnibus, and it's in, I think it's nearly there, actually. There's loads of news right now coming out about it. So in terms of taking a step back to the original question and thinking about, which is best for an exploration company or a smaller company, even somebody in development, double materiality is very challenging. And also the prescriptive nature and the breadth of the requirements would make CSRD a real challenge for them. So whilst I can see that within the EU it might seem easy, if you like, to try and align the UNFC and the CSRD, and then there's the green taxonomy and all sorts of other stuff going on, I can see why it would be attractive to align them all together. But again, it comes back down to the purpose of the UNFC and who the intended audience is, and also who we are making go through it. So the reason that I think the ISSB and that kind of raft of frameworks is more useful is that not only does it position things from a business perspective, it's also far more flexible in terms of how you can use the recommendations. There aren't 11,000 data points. There are far less requirements in terms of prescriptive requirements. And the process that you have to go by to do or to align to ISSB is a little bit more intuitive. It's more in line with reporting frameworks, as Chris said, like TCFD. So if you were going about your journey and kind of starting in the climate change sphere, you could then roll it out, and it's a very similar way of thinking. So yeah, in terms of alignment with a broad sustainability framework, I would think that ISSB would be better. It also enhances international applicability, because obviously a lot of mining gets done inside Canada, which uses ISSB.
Well, and this touches on 7 points. So within the strategic project allocation, some of these are in third countries or third nations, which are non-EU member states who don't have the freedom of travel. And as a result, again, you've got that broader applicability that, these are in jurisdictions, particularly in Africa, that are already aligned to ISSB in some instances. I guess, though, you get to that question of what's the point of UNFC? We've talked about how maybe before on other episodes, it's not about providing an alternative to Crisco and those that investor elements. So we've got that financial versus double materiality. Maybe people care about that systems level impact approach, which aligns more with double materiality. That's too prescriptive in the way CSR do. ISSB, is there a way, could you enlighten us a little bit more about what's under the hood of the lovely 4-letter world? What's it really getting at? And is there a way that maybe we could tailor some of what's in it to give that double materiality lens down that e-axis? Are there ways of doing that?
So the ISSB uses what's known as the 4-pillar approach, which essentially is integrated risk management. So there's strategy, risk management, governance, metrics and targets. And essentially they all have the words risk management in. So you can basically think about risk management as being the way to do all of ISSB, which is lovely, because you really, as a natural resources entity, should have pretty good risk management. One, because the nature of your work, but two, if you are in exploration or development, it's a big game of risk, to be honest with you. And so it should be something that you are thinking about constantly anyway. And on the flip side of that, I think, the way that we work, I also feel that a double materiality assessment could actually also just be part of risk management. It's just getting the external perspective as well as the internal perspective. And to be honest, if you were doing your engagement correctly and your risk management correctly, you should have a good idea of what an external perspective of your entity is. I don't think you need the extensive framework that CSRD provides you with and the recommendations that it requires to have that understanding. And so I think sometimes this is the problem on trying to rely on any kind of framework for this. I understand the want to or the need to, but to be honest, none are designed specifically for this. And so it can be very difficult to shoehorn the natural resources sector full stop into anything that pre-exists. But I guess going back to ISSB, if you use the 4 pillars and actually it doesn't dictate how you do risk management, you can find a way of doing it that suits you, suits your stage, suits the level of development, your context, your commodity, your whatever. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it probably is the nicer place to go.
I think it's an interesting point, and it comes back into that maturity point you started to flag at the start, which is that just because you're early in the value chain doesn't mean you're low maturity. Actually, we work with plenty of people who are more mature than entities further along the value chain because they've realised that 4-pillar approach. And so, yes, they might have the teams to do the resource-intensive data collection, but they've got the culture and the risk management piece in there. Somebody once explained UNFC to me, and we talked about this on another episode, it's like a 3D cube of snakes and ladders. It's actually a scenario analysis tool, right? So it's what makes you go up, what makes you come down, and you've got those 3 axes to play with. That's a part of ISSB, that scenario analysis. Do you see that there's a way to maybe, is there any linkage there that makes sense with your experience of ISSB, or do you think it's at odds and ends?
No, I would agree with that, and I think that's a nice way to view it. Actually, I think we operate in a uncertain world, at a challenging time to be in the world, and there are, huge challenges that we are going to face both within the natural resources sector, but more globally as well. The reason that a lot of this is getting pushed forwards is because of the push to a green transition, and some would push further for a just transition. And so trying to consider any of this without using a tool such as scenario analysis would be inadvisable, because you really don't know what the future is going to look like. And actually, I do think this is where the people who work within this sector are uniquely placed to do this, because you never really know what is under the ground. You never really know what you're sat on. And so it's interesting, because when people say, rolling the social piece into it, the environmental piece, it's so temperamental, things change so rapidly. The unsurety is so high. It's like, well, yeah, along with everything else on your side, to be honest. So it's not a new game. It's just a different player has entered the room, right? And I think the bringing it back to scenario analysis is a really powerful way of thinking about the different scenarios that are out there, thinking about, the different ways that the future could go. And there is some nice guidance within ISSB on both scenario analysis, but also resiliency planning as well, which again is a natural part of your operations when you're in natural resources. Like, what grade you need to be operating at to make money. What the commodity price needs to be for you to feasibly continue operations. You know all of these parameters anyway, or you have ranges for all these parameters anyway. What's another few? And I say that jokingly, like, I know it's very challenging. But it's, it's a nice way to structure some of this, and actually to structure some of the conversations that we already naturally have on these sites.
Yeah, and I guess that's the old adage, isn't it? That geologists are a group of individuals who are so used to dealing with uncertainty, and then it's sometimes amusing because you try and take companies full of that mindset and apply a different data set to it, and almost everybody wants categorizable rigor and exact numbers to stick on things, which actually is almost against the training that a lot of people in those companies have. So there's a lot of skills to deploy. I'm going to ask you the $1 million question, and I know that you and I are going to say there's no silver bullet, but in taking this idea of the ISSB related family of your TCFDs, etc., your TNFDs, this wonderful world of acronyms, what do you think would be those, not data points you'd put on that e-axis, but what are the things you're looking for in success as you align to it?
Yeah, so I am always a little bit concerned about prescriptive data points that people should collect, because I think they are really specific. Even from an environmental perspective, I think to put any expectations on people so that they can move up, if you like, in that cube of UNFC is a real challenge. I actually think that one of the best ways to look at it, or the best examples of how it's been done in terms of data, actually got rolled up into ISSB. So there was the SASB, just another acronym for you.
What does that one stand for, Rose?
Sustainability Accountancy Standards Board, I think. I could well be wrong. But they have like over 80 different industry-specific documents which guide entities through the data points that they can present. None are mandatory. You can pick and choose which ones you use based on applicability to you, and you don't have to subscribe to one. So you could, if you straddled a few sub-industries, you could utilize different metrics from different ones. And I think I understand that specific required data for UNFC would make UNFC much easier, especially from the perspective of trying to aggregate the data into things like national databases, which is a huge part of UNFC's appeal. I guess it gives governments and different kind of stakeholders a tool to assess what they have at a national level, or however you want to slice and dice it, regional, or as a continent, I guess, if you want to do for Europe. And I get that in order to do that, you need consistent data. But it's so context specific. And I think this is a challenge that we see often, especially, to be honest with you, within exploration and earlier stage companies. Not because of their maturity or ability to collect data at all, but because most requirements for data assume that you are an operational mine. And I think that applies not just to the mining sector, but to all of the natural resources sector. It's very difficult to know what data somebody should be collecting earlier on. And it is so region specific that I just, it's a real challenge. And so, and it's the same across all of sustainability. Companies out there want to know what they need to do, want guidance, want somewhere to start. There is a raft of frameworks and standards out there that they can look at that must feel incredibly overwhelming. And at the same time, the people who are writing this guidance have a very difficult job trying to write guidance that applies to a range of people. Yeah, it's a real challenge. And I think it's one that could do with some clearer definitions up front. I think before people dig down into, what the different axes of UNFC mean, I actually think it could use some clarification in terms of its purpose and the different applicabilities of it, because I think it probably does vary depending on who is demanding this and wants this and what for, and that can then dictate it.
No, I think that's brilliant. And I think that thank you so much for joining us today, talk through that, because it's the sustainability axes we've heard from other people on the podcast is a really challenging piece, because a lot of people are geologists who aren't necessarily from a background that has this sustainability world. And it's moved on so much. We just did acronym soup, and I think we can call you master of acronyms for today. It's a tough world out there to not just stumble on them, as you say, let alone get to grips with truly what is in there. So thank you for coming in and giving us a crash course. For anybody who's listening, who's going, these sound like useful resources, they're all online. Go and have a look. We'll try and link some maybe in the description of this particular episode as well. But a massive thank you for joining us, Dr. Clarke.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the UNFC podcast, exploring how we can integrate international best practice and sustainability into the E-axis of UNFC, taking it beyond the modifying factors of other resource classification systems. In the final episode of the UNFC podcast, together with hosts Alex Fuentes and Matt Grimshaw, we'll be exploring all of the different themes that our different interviewees have talked about over the previous episodes. Looking forward to summarising all of the important outputs and themes we've been discussing together then. See you next time.
The views, thoughts and opinions expressed by guests or contributors on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, Satarla and Critical Productions. Any statements made should not be interpreted as endorsements or official positions. Listener discretion is advised.